G'day fans, and we're back once again. DNA Reviews here to talk about good old Star Wars Obi-Wan Kenobi Part 3. Holy guacamole, was stuff going down in this episode or what? Mr. Aron, I know you are absolutely chomping at your own personal bit to discuss this episode. How you going tonight, old son?
I haven't been able to reach that for ages. It's one of those interesting things where half the series is done and dusted already.
Yeah, it doesn't take long, does it, Where it's just like straight into the zone, no mucking about. It's a very interesting episode. There's a lot. Oh, God, there's just so much to cover off about it. It's absolutely mind-bending. And as Aaron was saying just before we went on air, responses to this particular episode have been a tad mixed. Whether they be both massively positive or massively negative, I guess. But I guess we'll cover that off as we go along there, Mr. Aron. But what do you reckon off the top of your head, sir?
Well, so far, I'm in the positive boat. I thought this was another stellar episode added to the Star Wars canon. What about you?
Yeah, I didn't mind it, actually. There was a lot to process, and I can sort of bring that up as we go along, but I'm certainly the more positives than negatives, and I don't really think I have any negatives. But yeah, hopefully, if everybody has their thoughts and views and they want to post them here, by all means do so. I mean, the episode came out like 6 days ago or 5 days ago, so a lot of people have sort of probably read a lot of reviews online since then, but hopefully they've all joined us to sort of see what we have to say. As always, they're going to be spoilers, so if you haven't seen it or if you are concerned about that, then too bad, so sad. We are just going to be going straight into it. And for simplicity purposes, because the episode seems to jump around all over the place from this section to this section, this section, some of it actually sort of all put together just to make our conversation a bit easier, okay? So if you're thinking, oh, we've missed a bit in the episode, we haven't. We'll just get back to it later on. DJ's already said this dropped the ball for me. Nothing wrong except conceptually, but man, the execution. Okay, very, very interesting. So we'll see how that all goes. And Mark has said that he liked it so far. Indeedy doody didy. But as you're right, Mr. Aron, there's only 3 episodes left. We obviously can predict a couple of things that are going to happen. Obviously, Leia has to be rescued by good old Kenobi and all the rest of it. And everything has to be settled back the way it was in time for A New Hope. So anything you want to say before we get into the review itself proper?
No, I think if we go along, we'll analyse everything as we usually do, and we'll weigh up the pros and cons and why we think what we think, and see how it goes from there.
Very good. All right. So the first thing that we kick off with is probably the biggest thing of all for a lot of people, of course, is the whole introduction of Uncle Darth Vader, right? So I like this one from Colin. The only words reviews worth noting and reviews from Sci-Fi, and that is completely correct, Mr. Colin. Make sure you tell the world about that. So they introduced how some assembly required, good old Uncle Darth is all put together, right? Now we saw a little bit of this in Rogue One, so it's not like we haven't seen any of this before. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly because it's how the guy gets assembled. So we see him in his human form. He's stuck in the tank, which I don't know if it's a Bacta tank or not, but he's obviously not the happiest camp in the world. My first thoughts was like, okay, I never knew why this whole thing looks so industrial. I mean, it could have gone for a lot more of a clinical look, but they've done this clearly from a marketing, from a atmospheric perspective. But you do wonder. Anyway, it's got the old industrial look. It's got the big clamps and the metal chains and all the rest of it. And then we start seeing all the bits that go together to make yourself a Sith Lord. And the first thing obviously you see, this is spinal. I assume these are to be spinal supports. What are your thoughts?
It's interesting how Darth Vader's character has changed in my head. When I was a kid, I imagined Darth Vader being, a bit scarred up, and he'd like put on his leather gear and be good to go kind of thing all by himself. Now, it's like you said, a sort of an industrial process of putting him together. And I guess this is an era in Vader's life where he wasn't a major part of the Empire. He was living by himself in this castle, isolated. And I guess you wouldn't want to really live around Vader because you'd end up force choked, just if you spilt tea or something, wouldn't you?
Well, that's a very interesting point. And then I'm actually going to bring up Vader's position within the Empire a bit later on, so we'll get there. I like this one from Grant. Yeah, he's like IKEA Vader. Yeah, there's some assembly required. One Allen key will do everything for you. So we saw he's got spinal supports, whatever they do is anybody's guess. I'm taking the punt that these things are for the kidneys, right? They pipes that connect with his kidneys. So they've got to be disconnected, which is not a pretty process. I did look at the fact that he's got these really, really funky arms. I thought, well, why does he wear gloves? I mean, you might as well just leave the arms exposed. I mean, we know why from a costuming perspective, yada, yada, yada. But you could certainly look at it and go, go the full Terminator, just have the hands exposed. That'd be far more frightening than the gloves. But I thought it was just an observation. Nothing sort of critical about that. Yeah.
The other thing to bring up, is Vader like this because they want him to be intimidating within the Star Wars universe? Because you look at the Mod Squad and what they can do there. You know, you lose an arm, they give you an arm. You have your chest blown out, they give you a new chest. It's not like the technology isn't there, so he has to have the helmet and he has to have the breathing sound. Maybe it isn't it's sort of one of those things to intimidate people as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. You are right. Based on the medical science that we see in the Star Wars universe, they could have done a lot better to fix him up. I don't know. It's a retro discussion, because clearly he looked this way in A New Hope to be intimidating. But now that we're backtracking, you think, well, it doesn't have to be that way. But I don't know. That's a bit of a longer discussion, but we won't have it now. But we'll move on and we'll just sort of see how it goes. This is a bit of War and Peace from DJ. This is my first problem. Where is Vader? He could easily be off leading the Imperial Army, subjugating the galaxy, left been sighted. Yeah, well, it's probably covered off in the comics, because he does have his own comics, which I've never read. And there's a bit to discuss regarding that, as well as to how public he really is. We were always led to believe that he was out roaming the galaxy doing his thing, and now it seems that he's not that. It's like busy, not in the public eye as much, is what I'm trying to say. So I don't know. We'll have to get back to that. There you go. But no, he's chilling in a tank. Yeah, well, exactly right. So
in a New Hope, he was part of the cog of the Imperial machine, where Tarkin was above him.
I'm going to cut you off, because we're covering that off. We're jumping ahead, cool. But I'm going to bring that up. Okay, so don't stress. And you are right. And yes, you are right. The Vader comics are great. But yes, you bring up a point. But I don't want to jump too far ahead just yet. The next thing is, he has very unusual legs as well. And of course, once again, when you think he wouldn't need to wear the boots, because I mean, you look at that sort of style, this thing around here. It's like, what's the deal with that? I mean, that's very, very sort of funky. Yep. What do you reckon?
It is interesting. It's a different Vader design, and you know what? It's one that was years before we saw him. So obviously, as technology changes, his probably build changes as well. I do wonder how much of this was Hayden Christensen.
Yeah, you're jumping ahead again. You just got to be patient. At this point, we're still assembling the guy, mate. At this point, it's nobody. Just sit back and chill, son. Chill. All right, so we got a back plate. We're still putting the guy together, for crying out loud. So he's got this big arch back piece. Don't know what the deal is with that, but he's got one anyway, which covers the spinal part, which is all very, very groovy. We now find that there are extra teeth along the edge of the lower part of the jawline, which I don't think have been there previously. So I don't know what the deal was with that. And then that put us into the back part. And as has been mentioned, apparently, I don't know where this was referenced, but apparently putting on the suit for the poor bastard is a bit on the painful side. So it wouldn't be the most pleasant thing of all time. And that, I think, got us into the chest box. Now, the interesting thing about the chest box, it's a bit painful putting the suit on, apparently. I mean, look how long those prongs are. It's like, crikeys, couldn't they get him any longer? That'd go right through the other side of your body. That's hardcore. What do you reckon?
No, in my stomach, it just scratched the surface, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so clearly that's in design to say, his internal organs aren't exactly all human anymore, and this thing has to go a long way in to keep him alive. And, of course, once that's all done, he's ready to party. Now, it's interesting, I'm just putting this in here just for those who like this sort of shit. The chest box design has sort of changed. I mean, not the actual lights and all the rest of it, but how it attaches. Because I didn't realize this until I watched it back. In Revenge of the Sith, which is this version here, there are no straps at all keeping the box in place, which supports the Obi-Wan Kenobi version where it's bolted in with these prongs. Whereas in Empire and Jedi and all the rest of it, there are straps. You can see them here and here. And this is obviously because it was a costuming thing. They needed the box to sit in place. These straps go around the back, connect to these straps just here. So it's sort of interesting to sort of look at the evolution of how the box works, but clearly it's meant to just bolt straight in, as they do in Obi-Wan Kenobi. So I thought that was an interesting sort of way of looking at it.
The other thing, no one has ever run in and just switched him off.
Yeah, well, that's right. He's probably got an off switch somewhere. But yeah, so the box clearly is meant to just straight through. But obviously, when they did A New Hope and Empire, they didn't think of that, and they just had the straps on. But yes, it's clearly meant to be a little bit more hardcore. And of course, the upper chest plate too, just for completists out there. So in this version, he has the chest completely exposed, the upper part up here, which supports the Revenge of the Sith version, right? Which also is referenced in Empire and Jedi. But of course, as we know in A New Hope and Rogue One, he's actually got he's actually got the cloak over the top. So it's an unusual one where you can sort of see it there, where in the chest design for Sith and Obi-Wan is all exposed, and for whatever reason he covers it, right, and then he uncovers it again. So I just sort of just chucked that in for good looking. There are completists out there. And then finally, we chuck on the helmet, which is all groovy. Yay, team. Party, party, party. Now, I'm going to move on to a couple of things. Anything you want to add on before we go? I know we're going to cover off what you just said, but anything else you want to add in?
The imagery here is really fantastic. It works in sci-fi, and it's very reminiscent of the Terminator production line.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, exactly right. And that's obviously the design. So they put the guy being put together, and it's obviously meant to mean he's having a hard day at the office, which probably supports what like DJ was saying earlier. He probably can't be like this all the time. He's probably got to go back and get himself pulled apart and to recuperate. So that's, I guess, is how it's been interpreted. But you are right. The imagery is absolutely fantastic. Now, of course, as was mentioned, so apparently it is Hayden Christensen playing Vader, which, of course, you can ask yourself, well, what's the point of that? Could be anybody playing him, really. But I realise that because Hayden is nowhere near the physical size of David Prowse, they would have to go through a lot of photographic tricks to make him look bigger and larger and more intimidating. But it all works. I mean, this sort of imagery looks fantastic. So, yeah, as I said to Aaron before we went on air, they have to be very, very careful. They don't make it look like a fan film. And for the most part, I think they got away with it. So, but yeah, either way, they could say, we'll put Hayden in the suit for whatever reason. They could have used a different actor, but they've done what they've done. And so long as it fools the eye and people think, yes, he's this big, menacing David Prowse-sized guy, then it's all good. So, yeah, there you go.
And then, of course, one of the more important things is, you're probably going to say we're going to cover it later, but James Earl Jones back as the voice.
Yeah, well, actually, there's a big long. Yeah, so we're getting there. So now, actually, I'll jump there now, just to shut you up. All right. So there's a whole thing about the voice, right? So there's a whole thing about whether James Earl Jones has returned for the voice. I mean, Collins made this point here, so he did not record any dialogue. I think it's well known that they used an AI technology similar to Luke's voice in the Book of Boba Fett. We're on wherever planet we're on. And because he just sounded too perfect. I mean, he sounded like he's straight out of the Empire Strikes Back. And it's the same technology. So it looked fantastic. He sounded fantastic. And I guess that was the key thing. So, but yeah, I mean, a lot of people said, oh, they get James Earl Jones back for this. It's like, well, why would they? I mean, they could have sampled his voice from other parts of the films and just done the AI bizzo on it. So what do you reckon?
Yeah, well, we talked about that on the weekend when we'd first seen it, and talked about the voice and how perfect it was, and did speculate about that very thing. So, yeah, good point, Colin.
Yeah, some people have had massive hang-ups over the voice. Oh, who's this? Dude, who cares? It just sounds great. That's all that matters. So, far out. Some people get really hung up over this stuff. DJ said he's not too worried about the suit changes. Nothing says he does it in multiple suits. Oh, yeah, I wasn't being critical. It's just an observation. I mean, the suits have all changed over the decades, and it was just one of those things to just notice the changes. So, because clearly when they're showing it on screen, you go, okay, well, this version is different to this version, which is different to this version. It's not a big deal. So there you go. And you are right. Yes, he did record new dialogue in Rogue One, and you can tell his age. So yes, they've obviously fixed that up for this, because he is obviously younger, as it turned out. Now we ended up on Mustafar and good old Vader's castle. Now the funny thing is, I thought, oh, surely his butler has to return. Now, if you remember from Rogue One, the trailer, where you see this dude in his hooded cloak walking into Vader's chamber, and everybody was trying to speculate who this guy was, and it turned out it was his butler, right? Vinay, I think his name is. But I was hoping to see this dude, but we didn't, and it's like, oh, well, too bad, so sad. So there you go. We got Jib to the butler.
Yeah.
And sticking with the Vader thing, I know we're just got to try and finish. I'm just trying to get through this quickly, right? Anybody who's worn a Darth Vader costume will be well aware of this. The worst thing you can have is the codpiece's material. So when he stands up, he's got all these creases in the codpiece, and it just ruins the image. I mean, I can never work out why it was material and not a solid piece, but it just and because he's first and foremost in the camera, it's just not a good look. But
because he needs room to breathe.
Yeah, exactly right. Now, based on what you were saying, right now, I love this fantastic image. It's absolutely awesome, but he looks rather small in this, and that's probably intentional, because Vader in this part of the Imperial Empire isn't as powerful as what he is in The Empire Strikes Back. Right at this point, he's still a lower ranked person, if you will, to Imperial authority, i.e., Grand Moff Tarkin. And that was highly noticed in A New Hope, right? He can't go around choking Imperial officers left, right, and center and killing them all, because he doesn't have that authority yet. That doesn't occur until after the Death Star is destroyed. So I think it's part of the imagery to say, okay, we'll put him in this castle. He only gets brought out when necessary, when there are things for him to do, but he's not the same guy that we see after A New Hope. And that's important for people to realize. He's sure he's a big ass, mean, bad dude, but he still has to respond to orders. And he is, what's the word?
A subordinate.
What?
A subordinate of the Emperor.
Yeah, thank you. Subordinate to the Imperial hierarchy and like the Imperial officers and all the rest of it. So keep that in mind, kids. Oh, mum. So what would the butler put on the occupation of his tax return? Yes, he's the one who cleans Vader's helmet. What can I say? All right, so he's having a conversation with Gol Reaver, right? And the funny thing about this, wrong button. The funny thing about this is that they're saying about the Grand Inquisitor, the Grand Inky, as we called him last week. And they're implying that the Grand Inky died. And, of course, that does not match up with Rebels at all. Even if you go to Wikipedia, they've said that the Grand Inky in this show is the same one from Rebels. So it must be an audience bluff, right? So if you can put two and two together, maybe at the end the Inky comes back and says, sorry, third sister, you're in a bit of strife. You didn't kill me. I'm still alive. And it's going to end badly for you. So, yes, we'll have to watch this space.
Yeah, this is one of the issues. A lot of the issues were story issues that was coming up online about they can't kill that character. He's still alive in this and that. We'll just have to see what happens, I think.
Yeah, and hopefully, and as someone once said, they need to resolve it. They can't just leave it open-ended, right? They need to see the Grand Inquisitor come back because that is violating a canon that they've created, right? Yeah. And of course, if they violate the Rebels canon, then what else has been violated? So, and I'm being serious about this. Does that mean all the other characters don't exist and whatever else? So it gets a bit on the nasty side. But I know it's pedantic, but I mean, they create these timelines for a reason, and it's important that they stick with them. All right. The Vader stuff, over and done with. Now we finally get to see what Kenobi's up to. And, of course, he's having a massive stress over the fact that Anakin or Vader is still alive. And it is a lot for him to process. And, of course, he's on his own. He doesn't have Qui-Gon to talk to or anybody else. So you can understand his point of view, that thinking it's a bit difficult. And, of course, in the process, Leia wants to know about the Force. And, of course, she's Force sensitive but isn't aware of it at this point. And I did like the fact that he used the analogy of a light globe, light and dark and all the rest of it. And what do you think of that?
It is interesting, the whole thing with Leia and the Force and things like that, because Obi-Wan seems so fixated on Luke and seeing if Luke's showing signs of the Force, and he totally has ignored Leia. And it is one of those things where she seems to be, brave, jumping around, having intuition about other people. You would think he would twig and go, oh, maybe it's the sister that we look at training.
Yeah, well, you never know. I mean, to be fair, Kenobi doesn't really keep in contact with Luke that much. He just sees him, but he doesn't speak to him. But yeah. The Kieran Gillen comics do a lot with that. Gillen run starts with Vader on the outs and the destruction of the Death Star shows we're getting his prestige. Well, that's right. So we know that after the destruction of the Death Star, everything changes. Vader gets a kick upstairs, gets a promotion, and he's allowed to be a lot more meaner than he was prior to that. But in A New Hope, he's definitely subservient to the Imperial officers and Tarkin in particular, which I thought was really, really groovy. So the funny thing is, I don't know if you picked up on this, right? Kenobi fixes Lola, right? Leia's broken thing. And of course, Anakin was good at fixing things too. So I thought that was a nice little, I don't know if you can read anything into that, but I kind of did. I thought it was kind of
It was an interesting and I thought a charming scene. And I thought some of the stuff they brought up was quite good. And maybe, they didn't go far enough about Padme didn't get a name check. And, I guess he's never going to tell her that Anakin was her father at this point because of the implications. But I did think it was a really nice little character scene between Leia and Obi-Wan.
Yes, Grant, you are right. The Force is best described like this, like in the original trilogy. Even though, ironically, we know it's all to do with midichlorians, but let's not go down that path because that tends to upset a lot of fans. But the reality is it is actually based around the midichlorians. But let's move on from that, shall we? All right, so DJ will be happy with this. They land on Mapuzo, and the droids are actually doing menial work, which is what they're meant to be doing, which is particularly groovy. Now, of course, you've got all the droids carrying the bits of the boxes everywhere. I don't know what this guy is actually meant to do. He just stands there like a bit of a stun mullet, but, whatever. He's
slow enough for people to sneak past him, isn't he? So that's what it was required.
Yeah. It was a bit of a point. They could have just walked off the ship and who would have given a shit. But a threat that really wasn't a threat, even though that particular droid pops up later on, which is kind of groovy. All right, now, I love it. Now, we finally get a location shoot, and we're in the middle of absolutely outback USA, California. I don't know what's meant to be this place over here. So I don't think that's where we came from. If it was, they've walked a hell of a long way. But yeah, I wasn't entirely sure about that. What do you reckon?
I don't know. I just thought it was a world building thing where they've gone to another backwater planet and it's different from Tatooine and occupied by the Empire. Cool to see that, they talk about it once being a lot better till the Empire came and started draining the resources.
Yeah. You are right. You're right. At least it's not Tatooine. We are actually somewhere else for a change. DJ has mentioned about super picky. I think the actor isn't robotic enough. Yeah, that's a fair call. I mean, that's what the reviews are about, all being about super picky. You are right. It does look like they used to shoot MASH. So, yes, I tend to agree with you on that one. So there could be some old helicopters flying around. And as it turned out, Kenobi is familiar with Puzo's history. Oh, there used to be fields here and farms there and all the rest of it. I was like, oh, cool. It's a shame he didn't visit there in the Clone Wars animated series, because then it would have really been a nice little link. But I don't believe Puzo's popped up anywhere at all. So that would have been kind of groovy to see it like that back in the day. So one of the coolest things, now this is a funny scenario to be in, right? So Hayden actually appears, and this is brand new footage, as Anakin, right? And the first thing I picked up on was, why is he wearing the brown robes? You never really wore the brown robes. You actually wore black robes, but, push that aside. It was a good little bit. But the thing I found funny, I don't know if you knew this, is that after the prequel trilogy was made, a lot of people didn't like Hayden Christensen. They said his acting was terrible, his lines were terrible. He was just a bit of a persona non grata for like 20 years. And then as time went on, the fans had him in an about face and said, I would love to see Hayden come back. I'd love to see Hayden return as Vader. I was thinking, hang on. 20 years ago, you couldn't stand the guy for love or money. It's a bit like the Jake Lloyd scenario. Don't invite him to your birthday party. Now, all of a sudden, he's a popular dude again, and people are like, oh, get the guy back. Put him in the suit and all the rest of it. Friggin' 180 fans. Jeez, I tell you what, no one of those shit me.
Well, the thing is that the dynamic has changed. So us old guys that had an issue with the prequels when they originally came out, we've grown up, and the new wave of fans that grew up with the prequels and accepted them because that was Star Wars when they were a kid, they obviously love them. I am in the boat where I don't think he's a terrible actor. I thought the chemistry between him and Natalie Portman was terrible, and I don't think the direction was great with either of them. So that's where the issue lies for me. It'll be interesting to see if that's redeemed in this series, or how limited or how much they can put him into it now he's in the Vader suit.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Mark. Yeah, that's fandom. Yeah, that's exactly right. Freaking Star Wars fans, they shit me to tears. They piss me off the way they keep changing their points of view and attitudes. But I do agree. It's 20 years later, a new generation of fans, as you just said, things are completely different. But I remember back, 15 years ago, people couldn't stand him for love of money. It's like, oh, you guys are assholes. Anyway, the black robes are in the wash. Yes, maybe they were too. But it was actually good to see him and go, oh, there he is in the flesh. That was particularly groovy. So well done. All right.
Finally has the robes of a master.
He does indeed. Even though, which is funny, because when you see him in the special edition and he comes as a Force ghost and looks down, right? Because obviously they've used the Sebastian Shaw version and just put his face in there. It's like he's looking down thinking, why am I wearing these clothes? I never wore these clothes. I never wore Jedi robes. I used to wear this black garb. So I always thought that was a nice little gag. Anyway, enough of the Mapuzos and all the wandering around the countryside. Let's go to another planet, a bit more funkier. And it's good old Nur, which I thought was particularly groovy. And, of course, this is referenced in the Jedi Fallen Order game, the Fortress Inquisitorius. How groovy does this look, dude?
Sounds like something from Harry Potter. But, yeah, I do think that the shows do a really good job where they have new planets but introduce old planets that are from different areas of the Star Wars universe. So when you have stuff that's name-checked in the comics or name-checked in video games and then it's brought into the continuity as a whole, I think that's a really good thing, because lots of people get into Star Wars through different media. And if you didn't get in through the movies but you love the games and then suddenly something from the games is in the series, that's a good thing.
Yep, totally agree. And you get to see the inside. Now, I got to admit, I thought this was grouse, right? I was like, oh, look at this. It's the hallowed halls of the Fortress Inquisitorius. And as it turned out, when they capture Jedi, they take them here and they turn them into Inquisitors, or at least try to. And I loved all the reflective floors and all the rest of it. I thought, oh, yeah, if you're a supporter like the Imperial Empire, you'd be sitting there going, oh, this is grouse. I've got to admit, I thought this would look very, very spectacular.
Let's just face it. It's the Jedi Temple with the lights turned down.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. All right, now this is interesting, right? I had a bit of a laugh when I saw this, and a couple of things I got to bring up, right? So we walk, and Reva walks into the office, right? First thing I thought is, Didn't anybody bring donuts? The whole table is completely blank, right? There's nothing on it whatsoever. And I thought, how freaking boring are you guys? They're all just sitting there like a bunch of stunned mullets, nothing to do. And the Grand Inquisitor's chair, the Inky's chair, is actually facing the door. Like he's got his back to the door. And so clearly they haven't taken any lessons from Dune, because you don't do that. And I thought that was kind of bizarre. And I thought, well, maybe it's because he really likes the view. That's the reason why his chair is facing the windows rather than the door. And there's only 5 chairs. And I thought, isn't that interesting? So where are the rest of the Inkies supposed to go?
I thought that was a mistake. That's a convenience of writing rather than world building, because you go, oh, they've got 5 people in the script, so we'll make 5 chairs, where really they needed a bigger table, unless, when more of them turn up, they just slide more chairs up to the table or something.
You do wonder, don't you? But it is interesting. They're all just sitting around there. Like, there's nothing to eat. There's no coffee. As I said, there's no donuts. And I thought, oh, that's kind of boring. At the very least, they could have been munching on calamari with all the fish foods. all the fishes out here, which I thought looked fantastic. And I agree with DJS, the volume, which is their digital background thing. It really did look spectacular. And that's probably why the Grand Inky makes a point of having his chair facing out the windows rather than facing the door so he can see. Imagine that. If he's sitting there working away, looking at how good is that? And some Inquisitor walks up behind him and goes, "Oi!"
Again, it
Stop sneaking in.
It could be one of those world building things where they go, "We're so confident that we rule that we can actually have our chair facing the door because we're so confident that nothing bad can happen to us," kind of thing. They could make a story point of it. Not that they ever would, but there you go.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And I actually thought that was particularly groovy. And Daniel said, good to see the Fortress Inquisitorius, as we said it at ours. You needed an extra 9 chairs. Well, actually, I believe there's supposed to be 11 in total, if I recall correctly, from the Inquisitors. But whatever, they need more chairs. Now, speaking of chairs, I don't know if you picked up on this. And I looked at it, I thought, I wonder if there's a link. But the back of the Inky's chair is the same shape as Vader's castle. And I don't know if it's intentional or not. So there you go, nerds. Put your thinking caps on for that one.
You do tend to see sort of these subliminal echoes in the production of stuff, and it just reinforces like what side you're on. The Empire or the Rebels, and they all have like a different design aesthetic.
Marcus said maybe that's why they're all grumpy, because there's a lack of food. Well, to be fair, in the Death Star table with Tarkin and all the Imperial officers, there was nothing there either. So catering sucks when you're a part of the Empire. What can I say?
Wasn't there a big hologram projector on the middle of the table?
Yeah, but there's no food. Dude,
no.
They got the Death Star. There was a model of the Death Star in the middle of the table, right? But there was no chair. There's not like, okay, can someone pass me a donut?
That slides open and there's a bar inside.
Yeah, okay. Very, very. You're an idiot. That was the original concept of Vader's castle, with a tuning fork for the dark side of the Force. Oh, okay, so there you go. Very good. I like the sound of that. Very, very good. All right. What? The Grand Inky is a Vader fanboy. Well, yes, there would probably be some of those running around. And the way the Inquisitors act, you could almost think that they're like the groupies, because they're all trying to get in his favor. So we kind of get that anyway. Yeah. So anyway, good stuff. So we're back off to Mapuzo, right? And we've got some really, really interesting character moments here. So good old Kenobi, he's turned up to this particular location that Hajar told him about in the previous episode, right? And he's there. He's barely there for 3 seconds. He goes, nah, there's no contact. We've got to nick off. And to be fair, they are out in the open. I mean, what are you going to do? You can't just like build a campfire, build a fire, sing some songs. And they were quite exposed. So it kind of did make sense that they were going to hoof it after that. So yes, very, very groovy. And that, of course, then got us to meet Freck, the local redneck. And it's not very often you get an alien who's an Imperial supporter. But this dude was kind of groovy. I kind of liked it. What do you reckon?
He was an interesting character. I thought this whole section was really interesting because as Star Wars fans, we complain about a bit of stuff. And one of the things we complain about is kids in Star Wars. Anakin, I found annoying as a kid. Leia, I find sort of a good dynamic as a kid and entertaining in a family show. We're introduced to this character. I thought it was good. He looked like a mole, didn't he? I don't know if it's a race that's been in Star Wars before. But he is an Imperial supporter. And I did think it was interesting when they met up with the first bunch of Imperials. He's like, doesn't say anything about maybe you should check him out. And then the second bunch he does. So I don't know what's going on there.
He had time to think about it. Although maybe he was listening to the conversation in the back of the van, which I'm going to get to in a second. Okay, really cool characters on. This is where the wheel started to fall off. Oh, that's not a good sign. I mean, yes. Stormtroopers needed a lift. Well, I mean, it is possible they're on backward planets and they don't really, they're sort of like left out in the open and no one really cares about them. But yeah, it's a fair point.
I
And
did.
they've got
I
they
actually
don't have their own transportation. Sorry, what?
Yeah, I totally agree with the DJ here, because it kind of went across to more stormtroopers from troops, the parody, rather than stormtroopers that we've seen in Star Wars before. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, sort of more giving them a bit more humanity, but I did think these are some really dumb stormtroopers sitting there with the people they're meant to be finding, and like not even a force, we're not the people you're looking for. That was a bit iffy.
Yeah, it's very funny you should mention that. You said sitting right now. Daniel will know this. If you've ever sat down in a stormtrooper suit, one, it's not comfortable, and two, you do feel as if you're going to break the bum piece, right? And these guys just plonk down. So there would have been on the sets, there would have been crack, crack, crack as the plastic parts all break in the back. So I thought, yeah, they're just not comfortable at all. And most people who own a stormtrooper suit don't like sitting down in them because they are going to break those parts. But I thought it was kind of groovy. And they just plonked themselves down. Now, of course, as you just said, they're looking for a Jedi, and they clearly didn't get the memo. Said, "Oh, let me see your identification," because you are right. They're kind of pretty dipshitty these days. So maybe they're not all the sharpest tools in the shed. This is why they're all stuck on this damn planet. So, yes, indeed. What do you reckon?
Yeah, it was interesting. And then not only were they not sharp tools, then Obi-Wan actually stuffs it up and doesn't get their cover story straight. I did think that was interesting, and that Leia has to pick up his slack, and they have to backpedal, and the stormtroopers still don't think that's a bit of a strange thing.
Yeah, but it works though, because she's the one who says it, and this actually brings it into the whole thing of like Kenobi seeing Padme and Leia, which we did confirm it definitely was Padme that he's referring to from the last episode, and it has been a difficult time. And this was actually a really good moment. And you're right, the stormtroopers probably could have been a bit smarter about it. But because she said, "Oh, it was the name of her mother, and she's gone," and all the rest of it, it kind of worked for me. I kind of got it. But you are right; these two people are out in the middle of nowhere. He kind of does look a tad Jedi-like with the robes and everything. You reckon they could have put two and two together? Having said that, it's worth noting out. This is very important for a lot of people to realize. We, as the audience, know what all the Jedi look like, right? What the style is and all the rest of it. But depending on where you came from, you may have never seen a Jedi in your entire life. So the stormtroopers, before they got recruited as stormtroopers, for all they know, they say, "You know what, we're hunting a Jedi. What do they look like? I've got no idea." He asked Kenobi, and then Kenobi says, "I've never seen one either." So it is highly likely that some people have got no idea what a Jedi looks like, or what they're meant to be like, or how they're meant to act, or how they're meant to dress. So you can cut them a bit of slack, as in the stormtroopers, for that purpose. Well, it's easy for us. Yeah, it's not necessarily easy for the in-universe characters. So
you can see by Star Wars, even Han Solo doesn't even believe in the Jedi anymore, kind of thing.
That's right, and it's hard for the audience to sort of get into that mindset to say, well, okay, not everybody saw them. I mean, Tatooine never saw a Jedi. Even when Qui-Gon was there, he was undercover and all the rest of it. So you can easily say, well, I don't know what they look like. Well, he's looking for a Jedi, but I don't know what they are. So,
well, the other thing is in the last episode, you saw an ex-clone trooper stare straight at him, and there was no recognition at all.
Well, there could have been some people who said, "I don't even know what a clone trooper is." So, anyway, it doesn't matter. We move on. All right, so Leia's now trying to remember Anakin, which I thought was kind of groovy, and this reinforces the thing where Kenobi says about how the Jedi take children away from their parents, and I've had discussions, in other shows where some parents would be saying, "Great, my kid's going to go to the Jedi, handball them off, awesome," but of course, a lot of parents would say, "No, I don't want to do that." Right? Oh, the kid's mine. You can't just come along and just swipe it. And I thought it was interesting that he brought this up, because it's from the audience's point of view, the Jedi are noble and they're great and they're wonderful, but in universe, not necessarily so. And this was covered off in the Clone Wars, where some of the normal workers, the people, were saying that the Jedi are classed as being snobbish and elitist, and not everybody can join them. And as a result, not everybody likes the Jedi, which then reinforces the fact that when in Revenge of the Sith, and Palpatine says, "Oh, the Jedi tried to take over the government," a lot of people would have thought, "I believe you because I don't trust the Jedi because they're a shifty bunch of dudes." And I really like the fact that they reiterated this in his speech. So, all right, here we go. It's War and Peace. I have to try and look over this. Here we go. I don't know why they chose to have a weak Obi-Wan. Maybe they're trying to reconcile the weaker old man from Epcot with the pure. Maybe he's cut off from so. But for me, it was the wrong choice. No, that's fair enough.
I think I can address this because this was one of the things that I saw online a lot, where people were like, "Oh, they made Luke like a shell of a man, and now they've done the same thing to Obi-Wan." And I kind of do agree with Luke. That was a wrong choice because it wasn't the way anyone saw him ending up. But I thought about the way Obi-Wan was. And if anyone is going to be living in fear and shell-shocked, it's going to be someone who's had every single person they know exterminated. They don't even, they can't even regroup. All he's doing is try to survive to look after Luke. I don't think it's a thing where they're saying Obi-Wan is weak and going to be like that forever. I think he's just gone through 10 years of hell where he's just tried to survive, and this is his redemption. And you're going to get the motivations, I'm pretty sure, for him coming and looking after Luke and trying to train Luke and just surviving. I did think it was a bit of a shock that he kind of didn't help the Jedi in the last episode, but it just shows he's got to the point where how desperate he is. And I really hope, I don't know if it'll happen, I really hope that we'll see the return of Qui-Gon and his reconnection with the Force, and that will bring him back onto the right path and not so dejected, I guess, and just living in a cave in the middle of nowhere doing nothing.
Yeah, and of course you can't change his character too much because the Alec Guinness version, only 9 years later, he's also a pacifist and doesn't like going completely crazy with his skills. Okay, I wanted to see Obi-Wan cut loose. He didn't want to do it, but he was backed into a corner, as I say, Brandy. Yeah, that's an interesting point, and we're going to get to that in a couple of ticks. All right, so we're still going along with this. I don't know if you would have picked up on this. So Kenobi now has a brother, apparently. And, of course, for those who didn't know, in the New Hope novelization, his brother was actually Owen. I thought that was a nice little gag, wasn't it? So so it's not in this timeline, but I thought, okay, so Kenobi might have a brother. So which then prompts the question, is his brother Force sensitive like Kenobi was?
Yeah. Well, what I find with the writing, they often echo things from other drafts and earlier versions of the script, and they bring them in. And that's kind of like what they've done with Vader in this one. The lava castle was originally in Jedi, but they didn't bring it in until years later. So I like it when they do that, because if you are an audience person, you see something cool. But if you're a hardcore fan, you can go like Dags, oh, that was originally in the New Hope novel, and they've done this and this and this. So it shows a knowledge of the Star Wars saga from different levels. I think the writing is quite good on this, actually.
Yeah, it was just an observation. I thought, oh, okay, but it does make you wonder, okay, whatever happened to that dude? So good old Freck has finally gotten to the checkpoint, and he says to these dudes, yeah, they're a bit shifty and all the rest of it. And I thought, I like this, actually, because he clearly says, oh, yeah, it's not a problem. And then quietly, you better want to check him out. And that, of course, leads into this guy saying, oh, Protocol 23. And I couldn't help but think, oh, is that like the Protocol 23, a link to D23, which is the Disney fan club? I thought it was just a subtle little gag. So, yeah, there you go. What do you reckon?
Yeah, it is good. Like I said earlier about him not saying anything to the first lot of troopers and then mention it to the second. I do hate the Scooby-Doo type of thing where a character can have a conversation a meter away from someone else and they don't hear anything that's going on. I would have liked one cutaway scene where they're talking about maybe Padme or the Jedi and all of that kind of thing, and you have him sort of like listen and come back just to give you motivation to why he changed his thoughts about them.
Yeah. It's a good point, particularly a Jedi. Yeah, exactly right. So anyway, so they've turned at the checkpoint. The probe droid turns out. I got to admit, this is a cool moment. I mean, the thing is pretty scary, and it's like, look up. And as it turns out, and now, as I've mentioned there, Kenobi could easily use the saber and in the Force and all the rest of it, which is what DJ was saying a moment ago, right? But he doesn't. He still continues to act like a normal person, and it's an unusual one. Even when Leia was threatened by the stormtrooper holding the gun to her head, which I thought was an interesting sort of move, he still shoots the guy, and I thought that is interesting. And I don't know, there's probably a long discussion to be had as to why he wouldn't just, wave the hand here. There's no blasters to be used here and all this sort of thing. I don't know. Is it a bad thing? I'm not entirely sure. Clearly for DJ, it didn't work, and he thought, okay, the guy's just going to bring out the saber and just start slicing and dicing dudes everywhere. Maybe that's what should have happened.
I'd take the analogy probably like karate. If you're a black belt and you train every day, you stay at that level. But then if you don't do karate for 10 years, and you come back and try and fight someone, you're just going to get your ass handed to you. Maybe being a Jedi is like that. If you don't use the Force and actually don't practice it and don't have anything to do with it and actively hide it for 10 years, when you come back, you're not going to have those intuitions. You're not going to be able to whip out the lightsaber. You are just going to fight like a conventional person.
Yeah, and I think what DJ was saying, and he agreed, I think he says he hates it, that, people thought, okay, now this Obi-Wan's going to come back to being his normal self and just all these dudes left, right, and center, and the laser blasts are going to be reflected off the blade and all this sort of business. And, of course, that doesn't happen. It's the exact opposite. And if you like unpredictability, that was really good because it's like, okay, I didn't see that one coming. Even when the guy had the gun to lay his head, I thought, he's just going to he's just going to pull the gun out of his hand or something, and nothing. And the force push or whatever. But for that perspective, I thought that was kind of cool. But obviously not everybody was enamored by that. So here we go. Back to this. Don't evoke real world knowledge in the space wizard fairy tale. So there you go.
Well, I could point out the other extreme of that is Rey, where she couldn't use the force at all, and then Kylo does something and it snaps, so she is suddenly a master of the force from then on. So
that's another discussion for another time.
Yeah, we don't
too traumatized and scared to use his powers again, possibly. Yeah, maybe he was a bit rusty. Who knows? It's. I think we can debate this for forever and a month of Sundays. I liked it because it was unpredictable, but I can see why a lot of people thought, "What's the deal?" But of course, he can't be too in the zone, because when he meets Vader later on, look what happens there. He's complete. He's useless. He's useless effectively. So, yes, that could.
I do say, DJ, don't despair. I'm pretty sure we will see a good Obi-Wan fight later.
Yeah, all right. So we jump on the gun. So we're going to wind it right back to where we go. So first things first, okay, we sliced the stormtroopers in half. I thought this was a good moment. It's like, and it's like, you don't see that very often in the Star Wars universe. A dude gets sliced in half, and he's gone the Darth Maul treatment. So that was particularly groovy. And I think this is so funny, right? They've got to try and get through the barricade. It's a barricade designed to stop vehicles, not people. They could easily just walk around the outside of that there, or walk around this side.
that was a bit funny, especially as you had seen the above shot, so you could see how easy it would have been to walk around.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought, dude, why did you just walk around the damn thing? So it was kind of silly for the sake of being silly. Yeah. He could point out that the heat convention on Mustafar would have boiled Anakin and so the lava lake. We could do this all night. Yes, we could do this all night, but we're talking about this episode, not another movie made almost 20 years ago, actually. So there you go. Now, I thought this was kind of cool. Yes, we are confirming now that there are female stormtroopers in the Empire. We know they exist in the First Order. Now we know that they're existing in the Empire, which I thought was kind of cool. Yes, how did he bet that stormtrooper? He was on the high ground. Yes, exactly right. And then, of course, this brings in Tala, who's actually an Imperial officer who's now turned towards the Alliance. And that actually confirms that Hajar, who the fake Jedi from the last episode, was actually an Alliance sympathizer, because he set up the arrangement for Kenobi to meet with Tala. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So there's a bit more to that dude last week than what met the eye.
Well, it is interesting that the Empire has obviously taken over and reorganized everyone who was, I guess, in a position of authority, that they're now Imperials. But it's much like Bail Organa, where they're saying, how dare you steal the daughter of an Imperial senator?
Yeah.
He's a total rebel sympathizer as well.
Yeah, and that's something we forgot to mention last week. Yeah, they've swiped a senator's daughter, and clearly the Inquisitors are not happy about the idea that Reva did that, because there's some things you just don't do, and it does cause a bit of
do you know what would have been
consternation amongst the natives? Sorry, what was that?
An interesting story, because he's an Imperial senator. It would have been interesting if he had gone to the Inquisitors and said, "I want you to find my daughter," rather than Obi-Wan. In fact,
exactly right.
In fact, try legal ways before you get the Jedi coming out of hiding. Okay, go ahead, Dag.
Thank you. All right, so that was cool. Yeah, you're right, and he does just give up, and you do wonder, had Tala not been the one to kill the stormtroopers, what would Kenobi have done? Right? Surely he wouldn't have just given up. And I did think that when he's putting the gun down, he's still facing it at the stormtrooper. The dude was obviously a bit thick in the head. It's worth pointing out, and I have discussed this before, one of the reasons why stormtroopers are so bad at what they're doing is because this point, the Empire's been in power for 10 years, and they don't really see a lot of conflict, right? We see a little bit of what happens in Solo when they go to some planets and they've got to subjugate them. But for the most part, being a stormtrooper is a cushy job. You just walk around looking cool, right? Yeah. So they may be not that well trained in fighting in the first place, which is why they're so easily overcome. It's all about wave numbers. But
I'll tell you what, if you're a stormtrooper, you never get force choked by Vader. He's always
that's right. Yeah, just get left alone. Yeah. And you get stuck on these backwater planets. For all we know, those guys have been there for years and they've just gone, we haven't seen anything. We haven't done anything. It's as boring as batshit. So,
yeah,
I don't know. But there's a bit more to it. Yes, you are right. There was a lightsaber in his belt and he could have used it. So you would have to assume that he would not have gone quietly. So, but anyway, it wasn't necessary. It brought in the new character whose name I can continually forget. Tala, thank you. And off we went from there. So back to new we go, right? Now, the first thing I want to bring up, and okay, we've discovered Kenobi's on Mupasa? Oh, hang on. What's the planet called? The planet? Freaking forgotten its name. And I always wondered earlier, what's with the red lights? What do the red lights do? We see them on these guys all the time. What's the deal?
It's so when they walk out of the mist, they look intimidating.
Well, that's true. And even like River has them as well. It's like, okay, and they're all the same color red lights. And I always wondered what the red lights were meant to be. But anyway, not to worry. Now, for fans out there, I'm going to show you something cool, right? The next time you watch this episode again, I'm going to get through this very, very quickly. Watch this extra here, right? So while these two are talking, this person here is talking to this guy here, but there's no physical voice. They've done what extras have to do and mime their conversation. And she's pointing to these bits here and pointing to those bits there, not saying a single solitary word. It looks unbelievably fake. It stands out because the two characters are talking. Hang on, why can't we hear what the lady is saying right next to the brother? So, because in reality, she's not saying a single word. So, anyway, I thought I'd just bring that up.
So only for lip readers.
Yeah, exactly. And she's pointing here and pointing there, and it's just like, and the other guy be going, "What? What do you say?" Anyway, I like what Anne said. Yes, the red lights, so you can tell they are evil. Yeah, well, they're clearly not going to be blue lights or green lights. Red is the go for the Empire. I like the design of the character. I think you're meaning Tala, but having the actor under the ton of prosthetics. Oh, hang on. Talking with a whisper really didn't help. I don't know who we're talking about now. Maybe it's Freck. I'm not sorry, DJ. You've lost us there. But anyway, we move on. So Tala, she mentioned about Force-sensitive children are hunted by Inquisitors. And, of course, this is covered by Rebels. This is one of the reasons why the Inquisitors exist. So once they've started running out of Jedi, they start hunting Force-sensitive kids. And as we know from The Last Jedi, Force-sensitive children are being born all the time.
Yes.
Right? You kill all the Jedi. That doesn't end it, right? It doesn't just finish there. They're being born all the time. And, of course, the Emperor knows that anybody who's Force-sensitive can grow up and be a threat to him. Hence the reason why they continually have to hunt them down and find them. So, yes, and that was covered off in Rebels. So, yeah.
So he's doing the King Herod thing from the Bible where he just tries to kill the children that might rise. Also, I think there's an episode of Clone Wars where they talk about the holocrons being able to identify where all the kids are.
Yeah, it could be. I can't remember that one. You talk about the fifth brother. Yeah, okay. We discussed that last week about the fact he looks completely different to his Rebels counterpart. But yeah, it's a fair call. Now, this one, once again, now we discussed this earlier about like Kenobi has a brother, and of course, Owen was his brother in the novelization. And then, of course, Kenobi drives massive, absolute fanboy name drop. Quinlan was here, right?
Yes.
Well, and we're assuming he's referring to Quinlan Vos. And, of course, he's still alive because, as Tala says, he still pops along from time to time and helps out here and does the dishes and cooks a barbecue and, sews the curtains and all the rest of it. I thought, how good is that? Now, the funny thing is there are going to be people out there who go, who the fruikin' hell is Quinlan Vos? And, of course, for those who don't know the history, Quinlan Vos started off as this extra in The Phantom Menace. He was a nobody. It's just the dude they chucked in for this scene, right? This is on the... with Sebulba and all the rest of it. He's a nothing. But fans said, oh, this guy is grouse. Who's that? And they invented Quinlan Vos out of that. And, of course, then he appears in the Clone Wars. And, of course, he's then referenced in Revenge of the Sith in Boss, like he's taken over Boss Petty or whatever it is. How about that? So Quinlan Vos is back yet again. And, of course, he had a bit of a thing with Asajj Ventress, which was to do with the Clone Wars stuff. And it's like, how grouse is that? Quinlan's returned and he's still alive. Yay, team.
It is one of those cool things where when they name drop, it does give you a bit of a, oh, yeah, like when they go, we should have waited for Bosk in Solo or something like that. It is nice that some of these characters are still floating around in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, and a bit like Wilro Hood from The Empire Strikes, he was a nothing. He was an extra, right? He was just nobody, right? And then it was like a decade later, suddenly became a thing. You are right. Good to hear them name check Quinlan Vos. Anyway, Quinlan Vos is apparently still alive, which goes to show, based on this particular sequence, that there are a lot of Jedi who came through Mapuzo Doesn't roll off the tongue very nicely, and have been railroaded out to somewhere else. So I thought that was kind of groovy. So there are a few of them floating around.
Coming soon at Force Celebration, the running of the Quinlan Vosses.
Yeah, very good. It was a Clone Wars episode, Holocron Heist. Yeah, Cad Bane stole the Holocron, which are the location of all the Force children. So, yes, very, very cool. So, yes, Quinlan Voss is still floating around. As to whether he'll appear in the thing or not is anybody's guess. Now, of course, we're in the town. Okay, somebody's seen the Kenobi and the kid roll in, and, of course, everybody's looking for him now. Our Ned B droid was about to bash the living shit out of a stormtrooper. I thought, okay, was he programmed to do that or not? And I thought, I know, it was kind of interesting. So, he had his hand on the hammer. That could have ended badly for some stormtroopers. What do you reckon?
Yeah, it's one of those things with K2SO where probably most Imperials wouldn't bat an eyelid, but he's broken his programming because obviously the Rebels or the Resistance have made it like that. But that is the ultimate thing with droids. Because they're tools, no one ever expects the droids, do they? And that's one of those things where you can have issues if you're an Imperial or the Rebels with droid spies and reprogramming and things like that.
Yeah, and of course he said he's not programmed to communicate. I thought it was unusual, but anyway, I guess. But it is being such a large walking machine, it doesn't really make a great deal of sense. But whatever. Let's move on, shall we? All right. So we got the back room, and this is an interesting one, right? So Kenobi and Tala are talking. And they make that great line on, she'll make a good fighter one day. And, of course, it's like, oh, you guys have got no idea. But this is interesting. Tala calls Kenobi Obi-Wan, right? But Leia doesn't hear it because, as far as we're aware, she only knows him as Ben, right? And he actually says, I go by the name Ben now. So where is she when Obi-Wan gets referenced as Obi-Wan? And, of course, she's on the other side of the room. And you can argue, did she hear Tala say Obi-Wan? And if she did, that causes a bit of conflict with General Kenobi years ago. You served my father in the Clone Wars. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope. Remembering that Luke didn't know that Ben Kenobi and Obi-Wan Kenobi were the same person. So even he thought they may have been two different people. So if Leia in this sequence only knows Ben as Ben, then when she hears the term Obi-Wan later on from Bail Organa, she might think it's somebody completely different. So I thought it was an interesting one because it's mentioned on screen that Obi-Wan's been referenced, but did she hear that name at all?
It does. I don't think it would really matter because if you remember back when you were a 10-year-old kid, if someone you hung around with for a day or two introduced you to someone else once, would you remember that 10 years later? Probably not.
True. But the problem is that then it says, oh, General Kenobi, years ago, you didn't help me just for father in the Clone Wars, but you rescued me from a Papuzo and the Inquisitors and all the rest of it. So it's very, very fine line stuff, right? It is interesting because obviously, as we said last week, she knows him as Ben Kenobi, not as Obi-Wan. And in the message, it was like she was addressing it to somebody else. It's just a finicky thing. But when someone pointed out, oh, she should now know that he's Obi-Wan, I was thinking, well, does she? Because she's on the other side of the room, may not have heard it. So doesn't matter. All right. So finally, it's taken us ages to get here, but we're getting there, right? Finally, the meat of the story. It's a presence of not felt since, right? And of course, that means we've got the appearance of good old Darth Vader, right? And I thought it's a big thing. He's entered the town. It's like, what's more intense than Vader's breathing? When he stops breathing, right? And he just holds his breath and there's no music. And I thought that was actually kind of cool because clearly he's trying to flush Kenobi out. And so how'd you find all this?
There was the good and there was the bad. I thought it was really, really good the way they introduced him, how he's just absolutely ruthless and walks through the town and just kills people left, right, and center with his force chokes. Totally intimidating. I don't know. Look, I don't know if that point in the timeline Vader was that known for him to be going out and doing that, but it just shows. I think he's been sitting around for ages for Obi-Wan to actually turn up, and now he has. He is suddenly become an activated threat, and he's out there to get him. The way he was walking and stalking almost reminded me of a Jason Voorhees or something from a horror movie more than a Darth Vader, actually.
Yeah, I mean, the imagery was good, and the fact that he was so ruthless kind of worked. I mean, that was obviously designed to flush Kenobi out, and poor Kenobi's watching all this stuff going on from behind the door, and it would be intense because it's the first time he's seen Vader as Vader, if that makes sense. And I mean, that would freak you right out completely, thinking, geez, look at this guy. He's ripping, he's strangling dudes and dragging dudes and all the rest of it. Yeah. I thought that was really well done and really well thought out. And the visual imagery was outstanding. Is it the same type of droid C3PO had his first program? Do you want to ask? It was big and botch. Oh, I can't remember. Sorry, dude. I'm in the Vader zone now, so I'm past all the droids. So, yes. Yes, it was all particularly good stuff. And, of course, Kenobi then nicks off out of the town in probably one of the weakest scenes of the show because he's running around the mill, and a lot of people argue everything. All the hills looked exactly the same, and they may be just filming the same set from different angles and all the rest of it. So clearly Kenobi isn't interested in meeting him up front. He's done the bolt, and this goes back to what DJ was saying earlier about Kenobi is a bit of a wuss at this point. But the confrontation eventually happens. Now, whether you agree with it or not is an interesting one. I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of people, including myself, always assumed that until Revenge of the Sith, Kenobi and Vader didn't meet again until the Death Star, but they have met here. And that, of course, led into the duel. What I did like about this is the fact that it's a very, very slow fight, just like it was in A New Hope. They weren't doing the Phantom Menace, Revenge of the Sith, whacking and bashing and crashing and whatever else. But the fact that Vader was using this one-handed, which technically you're not really supposed to do because lightsabers are so heavy, you're meant to use two hands. That was George Lucas who said that. So,
yeah,
what do you reckon, old son?
It is an interesting one where I've seen people go, it's the worst lightsaber fight that's ever appeared in Star Wars.
But it's not meant to be a good fight. It's just meant to be Kenobi's afraid, Vader's pushing it, and it is meant to represent the New Hope version. It's not meant to be the Darth Maul be-all and end-all saber fight. So if people are saying it's a shithouse fight, well, they're obviously misinterpreting the entire sequence. But anyway, continue.
I'm not saying it's
no. You're saying other people are saying that. So I'm just that's my opinion.
I sort of interpreted this. Vader is very clunky. He is not in a stealthy droid. He has probably not had much. I don't know much Vader lightsaber fight practice himself, and then you've got Obi-Wan who hasn't touched the lightsaber for 10 years, and this is Vader who is a operative threat, and Obi-Wan who doesn't know really what to do. He's probably, well, you could see he didn't want the confrontation at all, and then you've got Vader has stalked him down, and you've got him defending himself not very well either. And I can understand people who say this is not how I imagined Obi-Wan's comeback to be.
So we're going to cover, obviously they have to meet again, right? And we'll explain why in a few minutes, right? But just taking this one at face value, you are right. Kenobi did not want to do the confrontation. He's completely shitting himself. It's been 10 years. He's not aware of what Vader can do. He's freaking out about the fact that he's still alive. Anakin's still alive. And as Dale said, good to see Dale joining us. Great moment. I am what you made me. So for poor old Kenobi, it's a massive, oh my God, I'm freaking out here. I'm seeing this big ass, dude. Right, he's clearly very, very powerful. He's frightening. He's very, very evil. That's a lot to process in a very, very short period of time. So I think if people are delving into this too deeply and seeing the wrong thing, saying, "Oh, the saber fight was weak" and all the rest of it, they're missing the point of what it's all about. Kenobi didn't want to fight him. He wanted to just get out of town to save the people in the town, which probably didn't happen. The town folk probably didn't end well for him. And it's a psychological moment, completely right, Dale, and that's the key thing about it. And I think it works well, although I don't agree with the one-handed thing with Vader.
But Vader actually says he doesn't want to kill Kenobi. He wants Kenobi to suffer like he did.
That's exactly right. All right, so I'm just going to go back a couple of comments. This is where we said there are limits to the volume, and I agree with you. There are some things that work, some things that don't. I think the thing in the middle probably wasn't so flash, and it is the limit of the TV budget. And yes, we've discussed that before. And unfortunately, if this had been a cinematic movie, things could have been completely differently. It would have been a lot more of a visual thing. So DJ said it was underwhelming. Okay, that's fair call. So, and Andrew said he's a cyborg. Yes, he is, effectively. So, very, very cool. Vader should have started with a Star Destroyer and Legion of Stormtroopers. The people are showing to jump in. I think it's possible, but by the same token, Vader knows that he's going to beat Kenobi no matter what, and in this instance, he does. So he doesn't need the Stormtroopers. He doesn't need the ship. He just needs to just beat one guy, and he does just that in this sequence that I don't think anybody saw this one coming. And you are right. He wants Kenobi to sort of have a hard day at the office. Doesn't just want to kill him outright. And regardless of whether you liked it or not, I don't think anybody saw this coming. No one could have predicted it, right? And obviously, people who love Kenobi probably would have thought he would have fought back or been a bit stronger. And he was he was weak at this point, and you can understand that. And Vader clearly had all the power, And if anything, you can at least acknowledge that it was a damn good sequence, one that we did not see coming, didn't predict, and it was a bit nastier than when people first thought. What do you think? What do you think?
Yeah, it was an interesting sequence. Again, I don't think because of the way they showed the trailers, there's not a lot of stuff that people can anticipate from the trailers. So this was something that wasn't really seen. Vader using fire to, hurt Kenobi was interesting because it, of course, everyone knows it mirrors what happened to him and him not killing him outright and wanting him to suffer. I mean, if he did get captured by Vader, who knows how long he would keep him alive and what he would put him through.
Yeah, exactly right. So, I mean, because you would think he could just snap his leg like he did with the dude in the town, but no, that wasn't the thing at all. And by the same token, Vader may have been thinking all these years, if I ever find Kenobi, this is what I'm going to do. And then he does find him, and it's like, okay, now I'm not really sure what I'm up to. So there is definitely a bit of that. It's kind of interesting. I just realized what I've got going on here. So the big question that a lot of people had, I'm jumping a couple of slides around, is that why Vader let him go. So he gets rescued by, we're going to go back in a second as to what happened, but he gets rescued by the droid and gets taken off. And a lot of people thought, why did he let him go, right? As in Vader, why did he let Kenobi go? Two things is, one, he enjoys the hunt, because one of the things about the hunt is that once you've captured whatever you've captured, that's it. The fun's gone. So maybe Vader wants to sort of hunt Kenobi down, knowing fully well that he's wounded and he's definitely not going to be enjoying himself for the foreseeable future. But somebody else has suggested it could be so Kenobi can uncover the Jedi-saving railroad that Tala is involved with. And I thought, that's a different way of looking at it as well. So in other words, looking at a big picture. So I don't know.
I did think after you've just seen him been so menacing and like lifting people and choking them and snapping their necks and stuff, that you get someone hiding behind a sand dune and taking a couple of pot shots and he doesn't like click his fingers and she comes rolling down or something like that as well. I interpret it maybe his full focus is on Obi-Wan. So when he's dealing with Obi-Wan, he can't really do anything with anyone else. But that's making up plot points, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's also the thing, I caught you once, I can catch you again. Now that he's out and about and he knows what he looks like. Yeah, exactly right. So there's a long discussion you could have regarding what occurred in that sequence. DJ said, like the moment, didn't see it coming. If he wins Kenobi, it helps on the transition to older, frailer Kenobi. It does, yes, although, as we know from episode 4, A New Hope, I mean, Kenobi's he's older, but he's not like got body parts missing. So
I did see on a couple of forums, and I didn't see it myself till I read this, that when Vader gets Obi-Wan, he paralyzes him all apart from one arm. So he's flailing around with one arm to mirror what happened to Anakin when he just had his one arm and was trying to get out of the lava. And I thought that was an interesting little thing that they put in.
Yeah. So DJ said the rescue was terrible, and you are right. It was kind of a bit wussy, isn't it? And I'm going to get to that in a second, actually. And he gets rescued by a spy with a blaster, and of course that led us into, the bit with Tala. Now, of course, the question is, how did she get out of the tunnel? How did she get past Reva out of the tunnel? And how did she know where the fight was? I know it's definitely a trope. Oh, saved in the nick of time. If there was a weak point of this story, this was probably it. And of course, I found it funny. Vader says, bring him to me, as in get the stormtrooper to run over and pick with Kenobi. It's like, dude, why don't you just use the Force to bring him over? And then, anyway, whatever.
I did think there was probably a network of tunnels under the town, and that's why they managed to move around without bumping into each other.
Yeah, I get that, but it was kind of a bit weird. Why bring him into the house in the first place and then find there's one tunnel? But, there's exits elsewhere that could have gone that way rather than through the town where everybody saw them. So, yeah it was a bit iffy. So, yeah, I hear you, though. Very quiet in Roadrunner. He doesn't know what to do with it once he catches him. Exactly right. And of course, he does want him to suffer. So he knows Kenobi's now wounded. And of course, as it turns out, as I mentioned here, regardless of how bad Kenobi is, they do actually have to fight again.
Yeah.
So Vader can say, when I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master. So, and in this sequence, that doesn't work. So they've obviously got to confront each other again, which I don't know. Do you agree with it or not?
Maybe in the next episode there'll be a montage of Obi-Wan training with the Force to Eye of the Tiger, a la Rocky, and then he'll go back fully charged with the Force.
Yeah, it does. If you want to analyze Kenobi's dialogue in A New Hope into great detail, some of it kind of doesn't make sense anymore, especially he was referring to Vader and he was before he was a pupil, before he turned to evil and all that, help the Empire hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights. Some of that doesn't match anymore. As someone pointed out, when Kenobi's talking to Luke, he never mentions any of this happening. Oh, yeah, when I caught up with your father, he was slicing and dicing me and burning me. I had a really hard day at the office. No, it doesn't. It just avoids all that, so completely misses it. So, yeah, it's a bit convenient. So unbelievable. So that's the end of the whole Vader stuff. There's other things I'm going to cover. It's 9 o'clock. We're going to keep going. We've only got about 10 minutes to go, I think. So overall, the whole Vader Kenobi thing, how did that work for you?
It depends how the rest of the series pans out. I am quite happy with how things have gone. If it doesn't come back with a better duel and a sort of redemption for Obi-Wan, then no, it may be a little bit underwhelming as if this is the main fight, but I don't think it will be. I think it will come back. And they have said Series 2 has been greenlit as well, so there's obviously going to be more to tell with more Vader and more Obi-Wan. Now, sometimes I do think less is more, and maybe filling in some of the things from this era is going to put people's nose out of joint in equal amounts of people who are thrilled by it. So it really depends how the storytelling goes for me.
Yeah, from my perspective, what they did with the Vader sequence, it looked great and all that sort of business, absolutely fantastic. But I was not a fan of the idea that they met. I like the idea that the last time we saw them was Revenge of the Sith, when Kenobi picks up his saber and nicks off, and then they meet again in A New Hope, right? And that supports that line when we last met. I was but the learner, I am the master, that sort of thing. And but having said that, Kenobi didn't need to learn that Vader was more machine now than man, right? So I thought, okay, I'll allow for that. But having them meet here kind of weakens that fight in A New Hope, which is only 9 years later. So, yeah, that's my only criticism.
The imagery I thought was fantastic, and it was really good seeing Vader flanked by Imperial stormtroopers again. That was great.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, this is what they did in Rogue One. It is a marketing thing too. So for people out there who can't haven't worked this one out, sometimes you've got to add in the coolest thing in the universe just to bring the crowds in, right? It's equivalent to adding in Grogu to Book of Boba Fett, right? You do that to bring the crowds in, right? You stick Vader in Rogue One, not the end sequence, but the Mustafar sequence, because it brings in the crowds, right? You put Vader in Kenobi and have them two of them match up. Everybody's going, oh, I want to see what happens. And of course, everybody dials in for it. Whether it dilutes the overall story is up to the individual. For some it will, for some it won't. But if it was up to me personally, I wouldn't have had them meet at all. But that's the way it goes. Oh my goodness, this is a really long. Good old DJ's obviously got a keyboard. He's been typing a long message. Oh my god, we have to look up the top of it. The D Plus series working on the train characters, more series in the film, trying to recreate the legacy worlds and legacy on a TV budget just doesn't work like the solid movie data. Yeah, okay. And I guess that's fair enough too. I mean, TV budgets, I mean, they're not going to be able to do cinematic stuff, but I guess there's a way of looking at the world and there's a way of interpreting the story. And regardless of whether it's $100 million TV show or a $500 million movie, the story is still going to be identical no matter what, right? Yeah. And so it's the story that I think is the key thing here. But I mean, for some people, they see it differently. So, because Star Wars is a very visual medium and the visuals have always been very spectacular. So, all right. So that's what happened with Vader and Kenobi. We'll see where it all leads to after that. But at least, to be fair, yes, the visuals for Vader were very, very good. All right, now with Reva. All right, so we've just changed this around a little bit. We've only got a couple of pictures left. So she actually gets into the cabin, sees all the names of the surviving Jedi, and I thought, well, that can't be good. She's going to be going, oh, my God, all these dudes, mate, they all got out. What's the deal with that? And discovers that there's, as we said, the Underground Railroad that Tala has been running. Then we do this. She clearly sees something that sort of pushes her buttons. And I thought, well, this is what I thought. Is it a drawing from someone she knows or someone she had connections with? And if so, based on her image here, is she going to change allegiances? Is she going to stop being a third sister and go back to being on the good side again? I don't know. I think there's something in that. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I don't know either. It was one of those things that obviously we'll come back to it later. I'm not sure yet. I did think it was a bit dumb that they wrote all the names of the surviving Jedi down in a nice list so the Imperials could have a list to try and track down.
Yeah, it was a checklist, wasn't it? Who needs a holocron when it's just written all on the wall? So yeah, you're right. It was kind of a bit on the cockeyed side, but just the way she reacted, I thought, oh, hang on, she's seen something, and of course that's the Jedi logo, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm thinking, yeah, there's something in here for this. But of course, then she get to the end where she catches up with Leia, and of course the first question was, how the hell did she beat Leia to the end of the tunnel? Like, what's the deal with that? It's like, yeah, right. That one, they really balls that one up. That's a plot hole that I think they're thinking, that's right. No one's ever going to notice that.
Well, it also shows how she's moved her way up the imperial hierarchy, because originally she was hiring people who they wouldn't be able to trace back to the Inquisitors because they didn't want to, take it in the child of a senator. Now she's quite, confident enough to go, okay, you're mine. So they're not hiding it anymore.
Yeah, and of course it is interesting whether she'll see, as was mentioned there, like whether Reva will see parts of her own character inside Leia. So, but yeah, that was definitely a massive plot hole thing. And hang on, Leia's been running up this tunnel for half an hour, and then Reva just ends up there. It's like, how does that work? So, anyway, there's a very interesting point here. DJ said about the show is okay with the but not hang on, is okay, but don't want okay for these legendary characters. And you are right. When you're bringing legendary characters in, iconic characters, you do have the chance of ballsing them up. That's the last thing you want, where you end up ruining material that comes after it, even if it was made 50 or 45 years ago.
Yeah.
Very risky business. So, yes. So either way, yes, they might turn around, but you're worried. Well, either way, we know that we suspect that Kenobi and Vader have to meet again, and of course, Leia has to be rescued. That's a no-brainer. So, we could see something similar to the death of the Inquisitor, the Grand Inky, and the fallen order. Vader sticking the saber through her back. Yeah, I would think that it's the Grand Inky. When he comes back, he knocks her off, but you would think that Reva's not going to finish off the series. She's going to be knocked off at some point. So there you go.
That could be a good twist. She thinks she's going in to see Vader, and then she's shocked because it's the Grand Inquisitor's back, or something like that.
Yeah, there we go. Without Vader learning she's his daughter. Well, that's exactly right. So you do wonder. It's set up clearly to say, Reva's going to kidnap Leia, take her back to Vader or whoever, and say, look, I've got part of it. Kenobi will come to us. But what if she doesn't do that? I don't know. We'll find out in what's today, Monday, 2 days' time, when the next episode is due out. Very, very cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
That then brings us, even though she's not watching tonight, our Christie's Crimson Yawns. So this is all about, and like Christie's not watching, as I said, but the less yawns we get, the better the episode was. And I do believe you've actually been advised in advance.
Yes.
What the yawns are. What are they, Miss? Hang on, you can't tell me. Otherwise.
Was four yawns this week. This was a 4 yawn episode.
A 4 yawn episode. That's not too bad, but it makes it the weakest of the 3 episodes. So, list as far as I'm aware. So, what do you reckon? You are right. Tiptoeing around continuity. I know it becomes a mess that Trek has. He's right. It's difficult. It's very yes.
The only way they can really avoid it is going 1,000 years in the future or 1,000 years in the past and doing all new characters in the Star Wars universe. And then people would complain because they want to see Boba Fett or Grogu or whatever.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap up in a couple of seconds. So overall, your thoughts on the third part of the series?
I have to say it's an interesting paradox where there was some of the strongest imagery in this one, but I thought weaker storytelling where the protagonists aren't driving the story. What's happening around them is, which sometimes I don't like. So the first 2 I thought were fantastic. This is maybe a step down to a 7 for me, or a 6.5.
Yeah, my jury's out as well. I might stick with the 7 as well. As you said, great imagery and all that, but they went down paths. I thought, oh, God, you're leading yourselves into very, very tricky situations here, kids. And I can see why some of the fans probably loved it at first face value. Oh, my God, Hayden's back and Vader's back and yada, yada, yada. But when they sit and analyse it, you go, oh, hang on, maybe there's some cracks starting to appear. But they're not bad cracks. They're not like, it's not like Book of Boba Fett complete disaster cracks, but you do wonder what's going on. So
it's still a very, very watchable show.
Absolutely.
I don't not like watching it. Yeah.
Yep, totally agree. Dale loved the 3rd episode, which is great. William's about to nick off and leave us. We're actually about to finish anyway, which is cool. Grant thought it was great. So we'll see where it leads us in the next couple of days, which is particularly groovy. All right, we've run a few minutes over time. Sorry for all the Vader talk earlier on, but we did have to sit and analyze all that. That's what we do as nerds. Very good stuff. All right, guys, we're going to leave you to it. Any final words before we buzz off for the evening, Mr. Aron?
Not really. This Wednesday is going to be an interesting episode, probably make or break story-wise for where the series goes.
Yeah, exactly right. All right, lawyers, we'll leave it to it. We'll see you next Monday to pick apart episode 4, part 4. Yay, team. All right, leave yourselves to it. And may the dark side of the force be with you.
Have a good night, guys.
Okay, see ya.
See you.